Well, we take it down. Where do you want us?
Just pick one of those circles.
Oh, they're
Little
painted
white
circles?
circles on the
Okay.
We're gonna use this one. Yeah. You guys are battling. I know it's a little rainy and drizzly. I mean, I think you guys, Dave and I, there's probably no bad weather for a canoe ride, so nice to see everyone kind of sharing that enthusiasm. So first day, lots of little things just to go over, as you kind of saw inside there, the paperwork piece. And then just as the beginning, we're going to just quickly start with talking about Transport Canada regulations. So Transport Canada, dealing with all transportation, including on-water vessels, and canoe is considered an on-water vessel. So they have some regulations that are required by law, and we're just going to quickly talk about those. Those do include our paddles and our PFDs, as well as our throw bags. So we'll be getting those after we kind of have a quick chat, okay? All right, so first thing that's required, or one of the things that's required, is to have 15 meters of rope. It doesn't have to come in this fancy bag. This is just a really efficient way to have 15 meters of rope bound up. But this is efficient as well because ultimately it's designed to be a throwing device. So if someone was in need of help, you could utilize the flotation in the bag to throw the bag to someone and then kind of reel them in. So Transport Canada requires 15 meters of rope in the canoe at all times, as well as a bailer. You can imagine why. Whether you overturn, whether you're into some larger swell and waves get in your boat, or it's raining like this evening, you'd be surprised after a light rain over a period of time, your boat can really fill up. So it's really handy to have these things, and really nice, kind of a reusable product as well. So with the old Javex container, which is good to see. So also a part of that, Transport Canada does require an extra paddle just to be in the canoe at all times. It's a good practice anyway. For anyone that's done any length of canoe tripping, sometimes paddles do break. Sometimes you lose them, sometimes they float down the river, and there's nothing worse obviously than being in a canoe without a paddle, right? Hands only go so far. And finally, probably the most important piece of equipment for a canoeer is the PFD. So PFDs are required, and they need to be worn. So that's kind of sometimes an often misconception. You see often people paddling in canoes, and they have them in the boat, or they have them on the deck of their stand-up paddleboard. And it's really not what we're looking for. PFD is only going to be safe if it's on you and it's done up correctly. I find personally, as I've paddled throughout my years in life, it just becomes part of the equipment, right? It becomes like putting on the helmet when you go play hockey, right? It just becomes a normal piece of the puzzle. And you can see Dave and I, as soon as we kind of get into that canoeing mode, we have the PFDs on and we're ready to go. It's probably just force of habit, but as you'll see as you move into trying on, if you don't have your own, they do run a range of styles, as I've mentioned, whether that's based on materials, just the efficiency with regards to your ability to move your arms. The higher end ones might be made of neoprene and such, but they all kind of do that general purpose, right? They keep you afloat when your boat does overturn. So when we're trying to size the PFD, you'll see they'll have a size in the back, small, medium, and large. That's a great technique to pick that initial size. And it's very important that the PFD is on correctly. So you'll see mine, for example, and maybe the ones you borrow today will have a range of straps. So mine have kind of these two side straps, which I need to cinch up on either end. And then it has this lower buckle, which I need to ensure is buckled up, and then it has a side zipper with a little clasp here. So I'll make sure I'm all done up. And you can do the same, and then usually you get into a buddy system. So if it was Dave and I as our paddle partners, then Dave can come over just before, kind of a quick check. Dave can check my PFD, right? And then he can, usually what we do is the pull-up test, so we kind of pull the upper straps. And if your PFD comes way up above your face, it's not really ideal. Maybe you want to tighten it a little more. You can imagine that when you are in the water, and if your PFD is up over your face, it's going to lead to a lot of challenges, and it just doesn't make it a great situation for you. So you really want to make sure it's snug fitting. I think That's also a big problem. You see a lot of PFDs that are all loose and waggly and really not going to do much for you if you do or you know, you're in the water and you're trying to swim. You want to add anything?
Just the fact of the whistle.
Oh yeah. So also you'll see most of the PFDs that we have at the club, they all have a whistle on them. Transport Canada does also require you to have a whistle. And we will just quickly probably review whistle signals. So one whistle just means your attention. So if Dave or I were to blow the whistle, it just means we need your attention. So you should look at the person that's blowing the whistle. Two whistles means stop and kind of hang tight, like don't move, just kind of limbo, float where you're at. And then three whistles is an emergency, which if you're not in the emergency would probably need to come off the water. And you know, so if you overturn your canoe, and we call that an emergency, you blow your whistle, kind of 3 loud blasts, and then that gives everyone the signal that someone's flipped, someone's in an emergency situation, and then we can support from there. Yeah. So, as we mentioned in regards to the paddles, so there's an appropriate way to size a paddle. You know, sometimes maybe personal preference, but there's a few general kind of go-to guidelines you can use to get the right size paddle for yourself. So typically, like Dave's demonstrating, if you hold your, we call this the grip, and then the neck or throat, and then if you hold it here, you hold it above your head like this, you'll see it almost creates kind of a 90-degree angle with your elbows. So that's a good way to see if it's the right length. You can put, we call this bottom part the tip of the paddle. So we want to put the tip on our foot roughly, and then it could come roughly up to your chin is another kind of way to identify if it's the right height. You know, personal preference plays a big role. Like so many sports, right? Whether we're talking about grips or whether we're talking about the length of a paddle in this case. You know, typically, you know, so many variables, whether you're paddling a river versus a lake, but sometimes people like them a little longer.
Short arm, long arm.
Yeah. And ultimately, you know, if you pick one tonight and it's really not working for you and you really think maybe a different paddle, you can always approach Dave or I and we can make that probably happen. Shorter paddles, I would say, are a little easier for beginners, especially with the maneuverability of some of our strokes. Beyond that, yeah, it's roughly up to your chin, or once again, you can do that kind of 90-degree angle. So what we'll do is we'll just call groups up. Obviously, some of us already have some of the equipment, which is great. Beyond that, you see we've leaned all our paddles up. Each paddle will have a number on it as well. So what we're going to try to do is to ensure that, you know, if you know, Danica was number 24 paddle, then she would always use number 24 paddle throughout the remainder of our paddle season. So we're not sharing paddles all the time. We're not just grabbing random paddles. So that's kind of her responsibility for the hour and a half we're here. We put it away. She'll put it away with her PFD at the end of the session, and then it's right there ready to go for next time. As well, the PFDs are also numbered. You might not have the same number, obviously, but you'll see in the clubhouse or the little boathouse here, the PFDs are all hanging on a hook. They all have a number as well. And the paddles, like, we're just trying to think, limit the contact. So if we can kind of stand beside the paddle versus picking them all up and checking them out against our chin, it might be more appropriate. There are general risks here at our canoe club as well. You can imagine uneven ground, for example, could be a potential hazard for some people.
Lightning, you know, the weather, we'll monitor it. If you hear any possible thunder, you should make for the shore. COVID, of course, social distancing, one person or one crew at a time accessing the dock. And we can also offer, people don't mind getting their feet wet, they can launch from the shore. Submerged obstacles could be logs, deadheads, rocks. So the mitigation for that is just look for those and give them a wide berth. There's very little current in the river here. The river's shut off right now, so it's just tide right now. Some paddlers may not have good swimming skills, so you know, try to reiterate to the other paddlers, so if somebody gets in trouble, then we can we can have a rescue. Anything else you want to add? You mentioned about the uneven footing.
Yeah, and I think there's some poison ivy floating around some of the edges of the property here, so just be wary of that. Leaves of 3, leave it be. Natalie would probably know a lot more than I do about that stuff. But yeah, so what we'll do is we'll call individual groups up, we'll gear up with our PFDs, we'll buddy with our paddle partner to ensure they're on appropriately, and then paddles, and then we'll just go back to our home bases just to do a quick discussion about entering and exiting the water, and then we'll get on the water. And obviously, you know, lots to go through on that first day, so we appreciate your patience for sure, and hopefully we'll keep it pretty light with regards to instruction today as far as strokes and different things. We'll really focus on that enter and exit point, and we'll get out for a little cruise. Cool. You guys have paddles and PFDs? Okay, yeah. Here's one. Yeah, that looks pretty good, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, and as I said, a little smaller, a little easier too, so. There you go.
10 and 11.
And we'll grab the extra ones at the end just to make sure everyone gets their choice kind of thing.
I don't have a whistle though. I'm okay if I don't have a
That's
whistle.
okay.
I'll get it.
Brandy, Harrison Allen. Do I pick any single one or?
Yeah.
No, it's
You
fine,
gotta
don't-
find one
you
that
rarely use it.
you know, support your weight.
Yes, you're looking at like. Give everyone
You've got
a
all our gear. Good for you, girl.
I got my wine glass.
Just like in the army, eh?
It's dark in here. Here's one for you, one for you. They've got a number on them.
Yeah.
Which one are you going to take? Which one do you want?
What's the number?
Mary's 15?
Pretty good. And if you find okay, yeah, go back in. Zipper, Dave, zipper malfunction here.
Okay.
Why?
A zipper malfunction. Holy smoke.
Yeah, it'll work. A little longer.
An extra paddle. So if you drop number 31. Uh-oh. You're fogging up. Okay, 31.
So maybe before we get started, kind of, we will quickly review the parts of the canoe just to ensure, like, this helps everyone with terminology, and also it helps when Dave and I are trying to highlight different things for you, like maybe put your hands over the gunnels, for example. You'll know what we're talking about, and it's not just this big Latin type terms that we're throwing at you. You'll kind of have a better idea. You know, they're pretty simple. They do have some unique names, but kind of just bear with us because it'll be very helpful. Stand over there in the middle so you can
The
see
front.
the parts. You pull the bow.
And you know it's because of the distance from the stem, front stem to the seat. It's a bigger distance. Front seat, carrying thwart or yoke, and that's just a thwart.
This would be the stern seat, and as Dave said, the smaller space behind. Obviously, it's pretty self-explanatory. You can imagine if you're sitting in this seat facing that way, you just won't have enough leg room, right? It's pretty straightforward. So you can just look, and that, you know, 99% of the time that's the case with boats. So this is the stern seat. We have the deck plates, and those are helpful when we're entering and exiting the canoe as well. We often sit on these, so these are called deck plates. There's one at either end.
Gunnel.
Yeah. So we have the gunnels that run along the sides of the canoe. These are gunnels.
Hull.
Yeah.
Bilge.
Yeah, hull and bilge is kind of the bottom of the canoe, or the tumble homes, like the side, like where it kind of starts to curve up.
That's it.
Yeah. And these are we have a range of canoes here. Most of them are between 15 and 17 feet. And most of these boats are also made of Royalex, so they're pretty good material. It's certainly they're almost indestructible, some would argue. Great for flat water purposes, great for recreation purposes. Ultimately, as I said, indestructible. Nova Scotia, we have a lot of granite and different types of rocks, and so it's really nice to have kind of a plastic or a Royalex type canoe versus like a Grumman, which is made of metal or metal, right?
Yeah.
Aluminum, or you know, fiberglass canoes. They're great for lightweight, but they're much more
Fragile.
yeah, much more fragile, right? So a boat like this is a great option if you're ever looking to purchase a canoe. They also make them in 3-layer plastic, so certainly that would drop your price range, but also very nice canoes. Usually the 3-layer plastic is a little heavier, so if you're ultimately using this portage thwart or the yoke and you're paddling through Keji Park and you have to hike your canoe for a kilometer, that weight can become a real factor for you. So that's kind of why some people choose lighter materials versus heavier. It all depends on the type of paddling you're doing. Yeah, so just quickly back to the entries and exits. So if we were on a shoreline setting, obviously most of the boat would be in the water. So let's pretend the bow where Dave is at is in the water, and I'm back here. Can you put my right here?
Yeah, we want to get that.
Yeah. So typically we say it's like 3 points of contact. So we want to, the person that's not going in the boat first. So in this case, if Dave's getting in the boat, he's the bow paddler. I'm sitting on the deck plate. And so I want to sit on this thing, literally sit down on it.
And this is shore.
Yeah, this is shore. So the tip for this stern piece is just on the shore, so it's still hitting bottom here.
And I'd probably enter the water. That's where the old sneakers come in that you don't care about.
Yeah, and so I really want to focus on sitting on the deck plate. I want to keep both hands on my paddle. It sits on the gunnels, and then I lean up against the gunnels, and I use my legs as that third point, and I do my best. Sometimes I can lock my thumbs around the gunnels to really keep it from moving. And you see as Dave enters the canoe, he's staying in the middle of the canoe. So we call that the keel line often. And he's keeping his center of gravity low. So you don't want to be all standing up straight. You really want to stay low. And ultimately, what I do quite often when I'm entering a canoe is when I'm getting in, I'll actually use my paddle and I'll slide it along as I go to give even extra more support, right? So once your paddle partner's in, you'll notice that I kind of just got in there, but it'll be a very similar process. I probably get the boat to float just a bit, and I'd bring myself in.
And I'd be stabilizing the boat while Adam gets in.
Yeah, and then we'd simply push off the shore. And if we were doing this obviously in reverse, let's pretend Dave was, so we're paddling back to shore. We finished our little tour. So Dave, you want to get out first?
So I'm closest to shore.
So I'm supporting the canoe with my paddle here. And then we just basically reverse the process. So Dave would sit, and I'd slide, walk into the middle, and then I'd step out and away. So that's for a shoreline enter and exit. Some of you might prefer the dock. Typically it's a lot easier. So in a dock setting, once your boat is in the water, right, you just run it alongside the dock.
One of us could just hold it.
Yeah, pretty much. And then basically, once it's along the side of the dock, one person can just, you know, take a knee kind of thing and just hold on to the gunnels.
So this is the dock here, yep.
Yep. And then Dave would step in.
And I'll probably just hold the dock with my hand while Adam gets in.
Yeah, and then I would kind of, same thing, I would kind of get in slowly and carefully while Dave's holding the dock, and then just stay low and have a seat. When you're in a canoe, you'll notice Dave is kneeling right now. The seats are great, but ultimately, as we mentioned, just like entering and exiting a canoe, the center of gravity is very important. So the lower you can get, the more stable you'll be for sure. So if you want to kneel, you can. If you want to sit, you can try that as well. It's personal preference, you know.
Yeah, if it's windy, rough conditions, you may want to go down on your knees. It's just more stable.
Yeah. And oftentimes we'll tell participants to keep their head in the middle of the boats, because often your head weighs a lot, and if you start leaning like this, your whole body's going to go. So you really want to try to keep your head in the middle. We often have a phrase, or I like to joke with some of my students, is that loose hips save ships. So if you have loose hips in your boat, you're going to be way better off, because it's going to keep your head in the middle of the boat, ultimately making sure you don't flip out. So loose hips save ships. There you go. Use your advantage. Good job. Okay, and just tell you what.
Tell you what, Amy, you come back here, sit here.
Oh, come over this side?
Yeah, once you get come back, sit back here.
This part we want to do.
Were you guys out surfing today?
What are you scared of?
Blake and I were down to the beach there at like 2, and it was like already starting to. The back typically is the one that steers the canoe. And today we're just going to be just experiencing it, kind of giving it a try. It's the same thing. Yeah, she'll hold it there. So yeah, your paddle will go across those panels. Yeah, step into the middle. Okay.
That's good.
Slow, keep low, stand up, even belly.
Good. Yeah, so usually you hold the middle of the canoe. There you go. Switch positions. Take your paddle there and what? Yeah. And then, yeah, what I would do is let's try to get the boat floating so you can grab it and get it in the water. And then once it's floating, you'll,
Taking it to there?
yeah, I would take it to right here. We're wide. Almost back up a little wide as you carry. There you go. Other side. And then maybe wide, drag it this way. There you go. All the way to the end. I would go all the way to the end.
Yep.
There you go. There you go. Sweet. All right, good. Yep, good.
Just take it slow. When you do things, don't do things fast, okay? Just do them slow.
Good job, guys. Good job. Good job.
Somebody's moving the canoe though. Want to get out? These aren't light.